What if a single wrong text could change your whole life forever? Clara just wanted to break up with a man who never remembered her birthday. Her thumb slipped on her cracked phone screen and sent her final angry goodbye into the empty digital space. The reply she got 30 seconds later did not come from her weak ex begging for another chance. It came from a man who ran the city's criminal world. A man who offered a dangerous deal. Wrong number. But come over. I'll make you forget him. But wait, what happens when she actually goes to that address? You have to hear this. Rain hit hard against the single window of Clara's apartment, shaking the glass in its cheap frame. It was a Tuesday. Tuesdays had no magic at all. Clara sat at her small kitchen table, touching the edge of a coffee mug that held warm white wine. She wore a big gray sweater that smelled a bit of dry cleaning and tiredness. Across from her sat a plate of cold pasta. 2 forks, one not used. Todd was late. Again. She checked her phone. The screen was full of cracks from when she dropped it rushing for the subway 3 days ago. 9:42 at night. He had promised to be there at 7. It was their anniversary. 2 years of lowering her hopes, dealing with his moods, and taking empty sorries. Her phone buzzed with an Instagram notice. Clara did not want to look, but her thumb moved on its own. It was a story from a shared friend. A crowded bar downtown, loud music, bright lights, and there in the back was Todd. His arm around a blonde woman Clara did not know, his head back laughing, holding a shot glass. Something inside Clara broke. It was not a loud break. It was a quiet week coming apart, like a cheap thread giving way in an old coat. She was not even mad. She was just deeply tired. She put the wine down. She opened her messages and tapped a number she had not saved as a contact out of pure stubbornness. She started to type. I saw the story. Don't bother coming here. Don't bother calling tomorrow. I am so completely done with being your afterthought. Leave your keys in the mailbox. We are over. Her eyes blurred with a sudden shameful sting of tears. She rubbed at her eyes with the side of her hand. Her thumb hung over the send button. The crack on her screen twisted the numbers at the top, but she did not care. She pressed her finger down hard. Message sent. Clara threw the phone onto the cheap table. She expected the usual sick feeling, the panic of a breakup. Instead she felt nothing but an empty space in her chest. She stood up, grabbed the cold plate of pasta, and threw it into the trash. Across the city, in a neighborhood where the air felt cleaner and the quiet cost a lot, a phone shook on a wood desk. Arthur stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city lights shine through the rain. He wore a dark suit that cost more than most people made in a year, but he wore it like armor. His tie was loose. A glass of brown liquid sat not touched on the window edge. The room was big, filled with leather books that had never been read, and art that Arthur found useless. It was the office of a man who owned things, who owned people. Behind him, a man in a black coat was bleeding onto a plastic sheet spread over the fancy rug. I did not take the shipment, Mr. Rossi, the man gasped, holding a broken rib. I swear to God. Arthur did not turn around. He took a slow sip of his drink. God does not check my shipping boxes, Leo. I do. He walked over to his desk, stepping carefully over the edge of the plastic. His phone shook again, lighting the dark wood. Arthur frowned. Only 4 people had this number. 3 of them were in the room right now. The 4th was dead. He picked it up. An unknown number. I saw the story. Don't bother coming here. Don't bother calling tomorrow. I am so completely done with being your afterthought. Leave your keys in the mailbox. We are over. Arthur stared at the screen. The raw anger in the text was clear. It felt totally strange in this room. A room currently full of lies and coming violence. It was a call for help from a normal ordinary world he had never been part of. He looked down at Leo, who was crying quietly. The boredom that always ate at the edges of Arthur's mind suddenly grew. He was tired of this. Tired of the begging, the expected betrayals, the endless cycle of blood and money. He looked back at the screen. He should delete it. He should block the number. Instead, a strange cold smile twisted the corner of his mouth. He typed with one hand while holding his drink in the other. Wrong number. But come over. I'll make you forget him. 4200 North Shore Drive. Gates will be open. He hit send. Then he threw the phone back onto the desk and finally looked at the bleeding man on the floor. Clean this up, Arthur said to the two quiet guards standing in the shadows. Get him out of my house. If you are liking this story so far, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you do not miss what happens next. Clara was scraping stuck tomato sauce off a pan when her phone made a sound. She froze. The sponge dripped gray water into the sink. It had been less than a minute. Todd never replied this fast. He usually let her wait for hours, waiting until she was desperate enough to say sorry for being upset. She dried her hands on an old dish towel and walked back to the table. She picked up the phone. Wrong number, but come over. I'll make you forget him. 4200 North Shore Drive. Gates will be open. Clara read the message 3 times. The words did not make sense. Wrong number. She checked who she sent it to. A 7 instead of a 1. Her cracked screen had tricked her. A deep red of shame crept up her neck. She had sent her weak, open breakup speech to a complete stranger. She started to type an apology, her thumbs moving fast. I am so sorry. Typo. Please ignore. She deleted it. She stared at the address. 4200 North Shore Drive. Everyone in the city knew North Shore Drive. It was the sharp cliff road looking over the bay, lined with big houses that looked like forts. It was where the rich, the politicians, and the ghosts lived. People who did not go to dive bars, people who did not eat cold pasta. Come over, I'll make you forget him. It was a line from a bad movie. It was dangerous. It was a sure way to end up on the news. Clara knew all of this. She was 26 years old, a data entry worker with a degree she could not use. Stuck in a life that felt like a waiting room. She was careful. She paid her taxes. She looked both ways before crossing the street. She looked around her apartment, the peeling wallpaper in the corner, the pile of mail on the counter, mostly bills, the empty wine glass. If she stayed here, she would cry. She would wait for Todd to come back. And when he finally did, smelling of old beer and cheap perfume, she would probably forgive him. Because she was scared of being alone. Because she had forgotten how to be anything else. Clara walked to the closet. She did not think. She just moved. She pulled on a pair of old black jeans and a leather jacket she had bought at a thrift store 5 years ago. She grabbed her keys and pushed her feet into a pair of worn boots. The smart part of her brain was yelling. What are you doing? He could be a killer. Good, the cold part of her replied. At least he is not Todd. The rain was coming down hard when she stepped outside. She ran to her 10-year-old Honda Civic. The engine complained as she turned the key. The heater did not work. She shook, holding the steering wheel as she pulled out onto the wet road. The drive took 40 minutes. The city faded in the back mirror, replaced by winding roads and heavy dripping trees. The street lights got few. The houses got larger, set far back from the road behind iron fences and thick bushes. Her GPS said, "Your destination is on the right." Clara pulled over to the side. She stared at the big iron gates of 4200 North Shore Drive. They were next to stone pillars. A security camera glowed with a faint red eye in the dark. She left the engine running. Her hands were shaking. This was the moment to turn around. She had shown her point, whatever that was. She was out of her mind. She reached for the gear shift to put it in reverse. Before her hand touched the plastic, a heavy machine sound cut through the sound of the rain. Clara watched, her breath catching in her throat as the massive iron gates slowly swung open. They were waiting for her. A cold rush of energy hit her system. It was the most alive she had felt in 2 years. She took her foot off the brake and moved the Civic forward. The tires crunched over the perfect gravel driveway. The driveway wound through a dark cared-for landscape before opening up into a round courtyard. In the center stood a stone fountain, dry and quiet. Beyond it was the house. It was a big modern masterpiece of concrete, glass, and dark wood. It looked like a museum. She parked her beaten Honda next to a smooth matte black Audi that cost more than her whole life. She turned off the engine. The silence was loud. Clara stepped out into the rain. She did not run to the door. She walked slowly, letting the cold water hit her face. There was no cover, no porch, just a massive heavy oak door. It clicked open before she could knock. A man in a dark suit stood in the doorway. He was not the man she was here to see. She knew that right away. He was too wide, his eyes too flat. He looked like a professional block. "He is in the study," the man said. His voice was rough, without feeling. He stepped aside. Clara stepped into the house. The air was warm, smelling of wood, expensive leather, and something faint and metal under it. Blood, she pushed the thought down. Down the hall, the guard said, closing the door behind her with a heavy final sound. "Last door on the left." Clara walked down the hallway. The floorboards were wide wood, quieting her steps. The walls were painted a dark gray, empty except for small lights that made long shadows. She reached the last door on the left. It was open a bit. She pushed it open. The study was huge. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the cliff, the black ocean moving far below. The only light came from a dying fire in a big stone fireplace and a single brass lamp on a big desk. A man stood by the windows. He had his back to her. He was tall, his shoulders wide under a fitted gray suit jacket. He held a crystal glass, the ice making soft sounds as he moved the brown liquid. "You actually came," he said. His voice was a low deep tone, smooth but with a rough edge. He did not turn around. Clara stood in the doorway, water dripping from her jacket onto the expensive rug. "You left the gates open." "I did." He took a sip of his drink. "I did not expect a rusted Honda Civic to drive through them. The security cameras were quite offended. It gets good gas mileage." He laughed. It was a dry, no humor sound. Finally, he turned. Clara felt a physical shock in her chest. He was older than her, maybe mid-30s. His face was hard lines and tired marks. He had dark messy hair and a shadow of stubble along his jaw. His eyes were dark, calculating, and completely tired. He looked like a man who had not slept a full night in 10 years. He was not normal handsome. He was striking, dangerous. He studied her in return. He took in her wet hair, her cheap boots, the faded leather jacket. His look was heavy, taking her apart in a matter of seconds. "You look like you are going to a funeral," he said, walking slowly toward a leather chair near the fire. "I just buried a 2-year relationship," Clara said, keeping her voice steady. She refused to cross her arms. She refused to look small. "So, yes." Arthur stopped and looked at her. Truly looked at her. Most people who walked into this room were shaking, sweating, begging for their lives or their money. This woman was just standing there dripping on his fancy rug, looking at him with a mix of challenge and complete tiredness. And who is the idiot? Arthur asked, sitting down in the armchair. He rested his elbows on his knees, leaning forward. Todd. Arthur frowned. Todd, that sounds like a man who wears polo shirts with the collar up. He works in software sales, Clara said flatly. And he forgot my birthday and our anniversary. And he is currently at a bar with a blonde woman named Brittany. Tragic. Arthur pointed to the matching armchair opposite him. Sit down, Clara. She froze. I did not tell you my name. You drove a car registered to a Clara Hayes into my private estate, Arthur said, his tone completely casual. My men ran your plates before you hit the second speed bump in the driveway. You have 3 unpaid parking tickets and a student loan you are putting off. Clara swallowed hard. The reality of where she was, of who she was dealing with finally hit her. Who are you? My name is Arthur. He did not offer a last name. He did not need to. Clara knew enough about the city to know the rumors, the groups that operated out of the ports, the men who owned the judges, the shadows that moved behind the shiny tall buildings. You run things, she whispered. I manage logistics, he corrected smoothly. He picked up a crystal bottle from a side table and poured a good amount of scotch into a second glass. He held it out to her. Drink. Clara walked forward slowly. She felt like a mouse stepping into a very clean, very expensive trap. She took the glass. Her fingers brushed his. His skin was warm. His knuckles scarred. She sat down in the armchair. The leather was soft, pulling her in. Why did you text me back? Clara asked, taking a sip. The liquor burned a fiery path down her throat, settling heavy in her stomach. Arthur leaned back, studying the brown liquid in his own glass. It was a slow night. I was dealing with a liar. Your text, it was refreshingly honest, brutal. I appreciated the lack of hidden meaning. I was angry. You were hurt, Arthur corrected quietly. There is a difference. Anger is loud. Hurt is what you are right now. Sitting in a stranger's house drinking scotch you hate because it is better than sitting in an empty apartment. Clara got defensive. I do not hate scotch. Arthur raised an eyebrow. You just held back a gag. She glared at him. Fine. I prefer wine. I'll have them bring up a bottle. He did not move to press a button or make a call. He just stared at her. The silence stretched thick and heavy. You said you would make me forget him, Clara finally said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. It sounded like a challenge. Arthur's eyes darkened. The cold amusement vanished, replaced by something haunting, yet strangely held back. He did not smile. He set his glass down on the table with a soft sound. I did say that. He leaned forward again, closing the space between them. He smelled of rain, smoke, and danger. But I think you came here hoping I would kill him. Clara's breath caught. No. No. Arthur tilted his head. Not even a little bit. When you realized you were texting someone who lives behind iron gates and has armed guards at the door, you did not think just for a second how easy it would be. I do not want anyone dead, Clara said, her voice shaking for the first time. I just want him to not matter anymore. Arthur watched her for a long time. He saw the frayed edges of her sleeves, the dark circles under her eyes, the sheer will holding her together. In his world, people broke loudly. They shattered. Clara was breaking quietly, folding in on herself. He does not matter, Arthur said softly. He is a ghost, Clara. You just have not stopped holding the seance. He stood up, towering over her. Clara tipped her head back to look at him, her pulse hammering against her ribs. He reached down, but not to grab her. He took the half-empty glass of scotch from her white-knuckled grip and set it aside. Come with me, he ordered softly. Where to make you forget? Clara did not move. Are you going to hurt me? Arthur paused. He looked down at his own hands, the hands that had ordered the destruction of men's lives just an hour prior. Then he looked back at her face. No, he said, and for the first time his voice held a trace of real humanity, a quiet, tired honesty. I deal enough damage in my day job. I do not need to bring it into my living room. He offered his hand. Clara looked at it. It was an invitation into the dark. It was a terrible idea. It was the end of her safe, boring, miserable life. She reached up and took it. Arthur's hand was rough. Calluses lined his palms, telling a story of hard work that did not quite match the custom charcoal suit. He did not pull Clara. He simply guided her, his grip firm, but completely without force. They walked back down the silent wood-lined hallway. The air in the house was perfectly controlled, yet Clara felt a strange electric heat coming from the space between them. He did not lead her to a bedroom. He passed a sweeping glass-railed staircase and pushed through a set of heavy swinging doors. They entered a kitchen. It was not the sort of kitchen where people actually lived. It looked like the prep line of a top restaurant after closing. Acres of stainless steel, a 6-burner industrial gas range, and 2 massive refrigerators humming a low machine tune. The lights overhead were stark and bright, a sharp contrast to the dark shadows of the study. Arthur let go of her hand. The sudden loss of contact left a cold patch on Clara's skin. He walked over to the island, taking off his suit jacket and draping it over a steel stool. He unbuttoned his cuffs and rolled up his sleeves, showing forearms lined with muscle and a faded jagged scar that cut across his left wrist. Sit, he instructed, nodding to a stool. Clara sat. She pulled her wet leather jacket tight around her chest. Are you going to question me under these lights? Arthur opened a massive refrigerator. I already know everything I need to know about you, Clara. I am going to feed you. I told you I dumped my dinner in the trash. I know. He pulled out a carton of eggs, a block of Parmesan cheese, and a slab of cured meat that looked alarmingly expensive, which means you are operating on an empty stomach, a bad breakup, and half a glass of mediocre scotch. That is a dangerous mix. He moved with an efficiency that was hypnotizing. There was no hesitation. He grabbed a heavy steel pan, threw it on the burner, and twisted the knob. Blue flame hissed to life. I do not need you to cook for me, Clara said, though her stomach betrayed her with a loud, hollow rumble. Arthur did not look up. He took a heavy chef's knife from a magnetic block and began slicing the meat. The blade hit the cutting board in a rapid, rhythmic beat. Thwack, thwack, thwack. You came here because you wanted to forget a man who treats you like an afterthought, Arthur said. The fat in the pan began to sizzle, filling the sterile air with the heavy, rich scent of cooking pork. The easiest way to override a bad memory is to replace it with a strong, grounding sense experience. He cracked 3 eggs into a glass bowl with one hand. He beat them with a fork. The sharp clinking sound cutting through the hiss of the stove. Is this how you run your business? Clara asked. By reading people over a hot stove. In my business, people usually lose their appetites when I start talking. He grated a mountain of cheese into the eggs. You, however, are a civilian and you look like you have not had a hot meal that did not come out of a microwave in 6 months. It was an insulting, completely accurate observation. Clara crossed her arms, resting them on the cool steel of the counter. She watched him. The sheer craziness of the situation washed over her. 2 hours ago, she was crying over a cracked phone screen in a damp apartment. Now, a man who likely ordered hits before breakfast was making her carbonara at midnight. He tossed a handful of fresh pasta into a pot of boiling water. For 10 minutes, neither of them spoke. The silence was not heavy. It was useful. Clara watched the tension bleed out of Arthur's shoulders as he worked. It was the only time he looked human. He plated the food with no show, sliding a steaming golden bowl of pasta across the steel island. He handed her a heavy silver fork. "Eat." Clara took a bite. The richness of the egg, the sharp bite of the cheese, the salty crunch of the pork, it coated her tongue thick and grounding. It was without a doubt the best thing she had ever tasted. She did not realize how hungry she was until she started. She ate quickly, abandoning all pretense of manners. Arthur leaned against the counter opposite her, a glass of water in his hand. He watched her eat. He was not smiling, but the exhaustion in his eyes had retreated, replaced by a quiet, intense focus. "Better?" he asked when her bowl was half empty. Clara swallowed, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. She felt a flush of embarrassment. "It's good." "It's perfect," Arthur corrected dryly. "Don't undersell my cooking skills." Before Clara could reply, her phone vibrated against the stainless steel counter. It sounded like a chainsaw in the quiet kitchen. They both looked at it. The cracked screen lit up. "Incoming call, Todd." The warmth of the food vanished in Clara's stomach, replaced by a familiar block of ice. Her shoulders tensed, her eyes locked on the screen. The dive bar must have closed. He had gone home, found her gone, and read the text. The phone vibrated violently, inching across the metal surface. Clara reached out, her hand trembling slightly. She did not know whether to answer and yell or silence it and hide. Old habits pulled at her, demanding she explain herself, demanding she manage his emotions. Arthur's hand shot out, moving faster than Clara could process. His heavy palm clamped down over the phone, stopping its movement. He looked at her. His eyes were completely unreadable. "Do you want to talk to him?" Arthur asked. His voice was low, dangerous. Clara stared at Arthur's hand, then up to his face. "No," she whispered. Arthur picked up the phone. He did not hand it to her. He swiped the green button. Arthur pressed the phone to his ear. He did not say a word. Through the cracked speaker, Clara could hear the tiny, aggressive voice on the other end. "Clara, where the hell are you? I come home, the place is a mess, and you send me some crazy text message. It was a work thing. Okay, Brittany is a client. You need to stop being so damn dramatic and get back here right now." Todd's voice was slurred. It was the voice of a man who was used to being accommodated. A man who thought an angry text was just another tantrum he could put down with a minimum of effort. Arthur listened. His expression did not shift. He looked like a man evaluating a particularly unimpressive spreadsheet. "Clara, are you there? Stop playing games. Damn it. Answer me." Arthur finally spoke. "She's not playing games, Todd, and she is certainly not answering you." Silence hung on the other end of the line for a long, heavy second. When Todd spoke again, the aggression was laced with sudden, sharp confusion. "Who the hell is this? Where is Clara? She's currently sitting in my kitchen, eating carbonara, and realizing how greatly low she set the bar for the last 2 years." Arthur said, his tone conversational as if discussing the weather. "Put her on the phone," Todd demanded, his voice rising in panic. "Right now, who are you?" "I am the mistake you're going to spend the rest of your life regretting," Arthur said smoothly. There was no theatrical threat in his voice. He was not yelling. That was what made it terrifying. It was absolute factual certainty. "Clara's things will be collected tomorrow by a moving company. Do not be in the apartment when they arrive. Do not attempt to contact this number again. If you text her, if you call her, if you so much as look up her LinkedIn profile, I will know. Are you threatening me? I'll call the cops." Todd blustered, but the fear was clear. "Call them," Arthur invited softly. "Ask for Detective Russo in the 9th precinct. Tell him Arthur said hello." Then ask him what happens to people who bore me. He pulled the phone away from his ear and tapped the red button, cutting Todd off mid-stammer. Arthur placed the phone gently on the counter and slid it back toward Clara. He won't call again. Clara stared at the dark screen. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in her chest. She felt a bizarre mixture of deep relief and sheer terror. You didn't have to do that, she said, her voice unsteady. Yes, I did, Arthur replied, walking over to the sink to wash the pan. Because if I handed it to you, you would have apologized for upsetting him. You are trained to take his extra damage. You don't know me. I know the ways of human power, Clara. It's what I do for a living. Before Clara could form a reply, the swinging doors to the kitchen pushed open. The man who entered was different from the guard at the front door. He was older, wearing a tailored navy suit. His silver hair was slicked back, and his eyes were sharp. He held a tablet in his hand. Arthur, the man said. He didn't look at Clara. He treated her like a piece of furniture. Arthur didn't turn off the water. What is it, Bennett? The docks, Bennett said quietly. Leo was lying. The shipment wasn't stopped by the port authority. It was sent elsewhere. The Chechen crew signed off on the list 3 hours ago. The temperature in the room dropped fast. The home-like feel of the kitchen, the smell of garlic, the warm pasta, the quiet talk broke at once. Arthur turned off the tap. He dried his hands slowly on a towel. When he turned around, the man who had cooked for Clara was gone. His posture was stiff, his eyes cold and dead. They sent it to where? Arthur asked. A warehouse in the industrial district. Sector 4. Get the cars ready, Arthur ordered. Put the team together. I want 4 men on the edge, 2 on the roof. No one leaves that warehouse breathing until I have the list in my hand. Yes, sir. Bennett turned on his heel and walked out. Clara sat frozen on the steel stool. The words hung in the air. No one leaves that warehouse breathing. Arthur threw the towel onto the counter. He walked over to his jacket, pulling it on, fixing the cuffs with practiced care. He looked at Clara. He saw the horror creeping into her eyes. My day job, he said quietly, the rough edge returning to his voice. You're leaving, she said. It wasn't a question. I have a mess to clean up. Arthur walked toward the door, stopping just a few feet from her. He looked down at her, a quick shadow of regret crossing his face. There are 5 bedrooms on the 2nd floor. Take your pick. The doors lock from the inside. My men will not come upstairs. You expect me to sleep here? I expect you not to go back to an empty apartment and a broken life at 1 a.m, Arthur said. You are safe here, Clara. Safer than you are anywhere else in this city. Because you're the one everyone is afraid of, she whispered. Exactly. Arthur turned toward the door. Good night, Clara. The doors swung shut behind him. A minute later, Clara heard the distant deep roar of multiple strong engines starting up, fading quickly into the rainy night. She was alone in a fortress. She looked down at her empty bowl of pasta. Then she looked at her cracked phone. She picked it up and walked out of the kitchen, heading for the stairs. For the first time in 2 years, she didn't check to see if Todd had messaged her back. The bed was too soft. The sheets felt like soft silk. Clara had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the flat, dead look in Arthur's eyes when Bennett mentioned the docks. She heard the casual way he ordered violence. The rain had stopped by dawn. Pale gray light came through the heavy blackout curtains of the guest bedroom. It was a big room decorated in simple whites and grays. It felt like a high-end hotel room, empty and cold. Clara sat up. She was still wearing her faded black jeans and the big sweater. Her leather jacket lay in a heap on an armchair. It was 7 in the morning. Reality was a hard hangover. The energy of the night before had gone, leaving behind a clear, scary truth. She had left a toxic relationship only to spend the night in the heavily guarded home of a crime boss. She needed to leave. She needed to get in her Civic, drive back to the city, pack her things, and disappear before she became stuck forever in a world that dealt in blood and shipping lists. She slipped her boots on and grabbed her jacket. She unlocked the heavy bedroom door. It clicked loudly in the silence. She crept down the sweeping glass staircase. The house was dead quiet. The shadows of the night had been chased away by the morning light pouring through the massive windows. She reached the bottom of the stairs and headed for the front door. Leaving without saying goodbye. Clara stopped dead. The voice came from the study. She turned slowly and walked toward the open door. Arthur was sitting behind the massive wood desk. He had not changed clothes. His suit jacket was draped over the back of his chair. His tie was gone and his white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar. His sleeves were rolled up. There was a fresh bruised cut high on his left cheekbone. A faint smudge of dried blood stained his knuckles. He was drinking black coffee from a ceramic mug, staring at a laptop screen. He looked exhausted. He looked dangerous. He looked exactly like a man who had spent the night forcing his will on the world. Clara stood in the doorway, gripping her leather jacket tight. "I didn't think you'd be back." "I am remarkably efficient," Arthur said, not taking his eyes off the screen. He typed something, hit enter, and finally looked up at her. "Did you sleep?" "No. Neither did I." He leaned back in his leather chair, studying her. In the daylight, he looked older. The lines around his eyes were deeper. "You're running." "I'm going home," Clara corrected, lifting her chin. "To Todd. To pack my things, to find a new apartment, to get on with my boring, normal life." Arthur took a sip of his coffee. He set the mug down slowly. "It's raining out there, Clara. In a way, your boring life is safe, but it's cold. You're going to go back. You're going to pack. And you're going to feel empty. And staying here is better." She shot back, her voice tight. She pointed a shaking finger at his face. "You have blood on your hands, literally. I heard you last night. You kill people." Arthur didn't flinch. He didn't offer excuses. He just sat there taking her accusation with the stillness of a stone wall. "I control chaos," Arthur said evenly. "I make sure that the violence in this city stays local, expected, and profitable. If I wasn't here, men much worse than me would burn it to the ground. That is my reality. I will never say sorry for it." He stood up. He walked around the desk, stopping a few feet from her. He was too large, too strong in the morning light. "I am exactly what you think I am," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "I am not a good man. I don't pretend to be. But when you texted me last night, you weren't looking for a good man. You were looking for a way out." Clara swallowed hard. Her throat felt like sandpaper. "You said you'd make me forget him. And did you think about him last night?" Arthur asked. Clara paused. She searched her mind. From the moment the iron gate swung open, Todd had stopped existing. He had been completely covered by the strong pull of the man standing in front of her. "No," she admitted. Softly. Arthur stepped closer. He didn't touch her, but his presence was overwhelming. "You want to leave? The door is open. The guards will let you out. You can get in your Civic and drive back to the middle class. You can forget this ever happened." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, heavy silver key. He placed it on the edge of the wood desk. "But if you're tired of being ordinary," Arthur continued, his eyes locked onto hers, burning with a dark, intense heat. If you're tired of being ignored, dealt with, and overlooked, you stay. You take the key. It opens the private elevator to the penthouse downtown. You go there. You wait for me. Clara looked at the key. It shone under the brass desk lamp. It was a real sign of a crossroads. One path led back to a life of quiet pain. The other led into the center of a storm. Why me? Clara asked, looking up at him. You could have anyone. Why do you want a data entry clerk with a broken phone? Arthur reached out. His scarred hand brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His touch was incredibly gentle, a sharp contrast to the violence he was capable of. Because everyone in my world lies to me, Arthur whispered. They tell me what I want to hear. They cower. They scheme. You walked into my house, insulted my security, complained about my scotch, and looked at me like a human being. His thumb traced the line of her jaw. I don't want someone who belongs in my world, Clara. I want someone who survives it. Now, make a choice. He dropped his hand, turned around, and walked back to his laptop. He didn't look at her again. Clara stood by the door for a long time. The house was silent. The engine of her Honda Civic was waiting outside. Her old life was waiting. She slowly let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. She walked toward the desk. The sound of her boots against the wood floorboards echoed like gunshots in the quiet room. She reached out, her fingers closed around the cold, heavy silver key. The drive back into the city was a blur of gray asphalt and flashing brake lights. Clara drove her dented Honda Civic through the morning traffic, the heavy silver key resting in the cup holder like a live bomb. She drove past her old exit. She drove past the street that led to the apartment she shared with Todd. The physical act of keeping her foot on the gas, of not turning the steering wheel toward the familiar, took every bit of willpower she had. Her chest ached with a strange empty pain, the death throes of a life she was actively leaving. Downtown rose ahead, a sharp skyline of glass and steel piercing the cloudy sky. The address on the key led her to a high-rise residential tower that looked less like an apartment building and more like a solid block of extreme wealth. There was no gravel driveway here, just a quiet underground parking entrance guarded by a man in a tailored suit who checked her license plate, glanced at her beaten-up car with a flicker of hidden surprise, and silently raised the barrier. She parked between a silver Porsche and a clean vintage Mustang. The private elevator was a polished steel box needing the physical key. Clara inserted it, turned it, and braced herself. There were no buttons. The doors slid shut with a soft hiss, and the elevator surged upward, pulling the floor away from her stomach. It opened directly into the penthouse. Clara stepped out carefully. The heavy leather jacket clutched tight against her chest. If the cliffside estate was a fortress, this was a watchtower. It was a sprawling open space of white marble, brushed steel, and glass walls that offered a stunning 360-degree view of the city. The clouds hung low outside, casting a soft movie-like light over the simple furniture. It was completely, deeply silent. Clara walked to the edge of the living room, pressing her hand flat against the cold glass. Far below, the city moved like a frantic, meaningless ant farm. Cars crawled along the streets. Sirens flashed silently in the distance. Down there was Todd. Down there was her. Data entry job, the pile of bills, the cracked phone. Up here she was completely free. She spent the first 2 hours pacing. She explored the space, not with curiosity, but with the careful edge of a trespasser. There was a kitchen that looked like it had never seen a warm meal, a master bathroom wrapped in black stone, and a king-sized bed perfectly made with slate-gray linen. There were no personal touches, no photographs, no books on the glass coffee table. It was the living space of a ghost. By noon, the energy drop hit her with physical force. Clara curled up on the massive stark white modular sofa, pulling her knees to her chest. She fell into a heavy, dreamless sleep, exhausted by the sheer emotional swing of the last 14 hours. She woke to the sound of ice clinking against crystal. The penthouse was dark. The city outside had transformed into a grid of glittering gold and harsh neon. Clara bolted upright, her heart hammering. Arthur stood by a floating wet bar in the center of the room. He had shed his suit jacket and tie. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, and he was pouring whiskey from a square bottle. The warm amber light from a single-floor lamp cast long, sharp shadows across his face. He looked over his shoulder at her. The bruising on his cheekbone had darkened to a deep, ugly purple. "I didn't mean to wake you," he said. His voice was rougher than it had been in the morning, scraped raw by whatever he had been doing all day. Clara swung her legs off the sofa, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. The sudden reality of his presence filled the big room, making it feel dangerously small. "What time is it?" 8. He walked over carrying 2 glasses. He offered her one. She didn't hold back a grimace this time. "I told you I prefer wine. There is a bottle of Chateau Margaux breathing on the counter." "But I strongly suggest the whiskey," Arthur replied dryly. "You look like you need the burn." Clara took the glass. She didn't drink. She watched him sink into the armchair opposite the sofa. He didn't sit like a man relaxing. He sat like a soldier collapsing after a march, every muscle slowly letting go with a quiet, invisible ache. "Did you get your list back?" Clara asked, her voice quiet in the vast room. Arthur looked at his glass, swirling the liquid slowly. "I did. And the men who took it. They will no longer be taking part in the local economy." He said it with zero feeling. It wasn't a boast. It was an admin update. Clara felt a chill race down her spine, a stark reminder of exactly who she was sharing a drink with. "Are you afraid of me right now, Clara?" Arthur asked, looking up, his dark eyes locked onto hers, stripping away the space between them. "I'm terrified," Clara answered honestly. She took a sip of the whiskey. It burned exactly as promised, sending a flare of heat into her chest. "But I'm more terrified of going back down there." She pointed to the window. Arthur watched her. The silence stretched thick and charged. "Why is there nothing of yours in here?" she asked, gesturing to the sterile room. "You live here, but there's no trace of you. It looks like a waiting room." "I don't live here," Arthur said. He rested his elbows on his knees, leaning forward. "I survive here. I sleep. I shower. I make phone calls. The estate on the cliffs is a fortress for my business. This is a vault for me. It's lonely. It's secure." Clara set her glass down on the glass coffee table with a sharp clack. "It's a cage. A really expensive glass cage." Arthur let out a low, breathy chuckle. It was a genuine sound, lacking his usual cold edge. "You have a remarkable talent for walking into my property and insulting my interior design. Someone has to." Clara stood up. The whiskey was making her bold. Or maybe it was just the deep reckless freedom of having already burned her old life to the ground. She walked over to him, stopping inches from his knees. Arthur tilted his head back, looking up at her. The exhaustion in his face was stark under the dim light. The cut on his cheekbone looked angry. "You're bleeding again," she noted, her voice dropping. Arthur reached up, his fingers brushing the cut. He looked at the fresh smear of red on his fingertips with mild annoyance. "A minor disagreement during talks. Sit still." Clara turned and walked toward the slate-wrapped bathroom. She searched through the perfectly organized, scary sharp cabinets until she found a basic first aid kit. She grabbed a damp washcloth and walked back out. Arthur hadn't moved, but he watched her approach with a hunting stillness, his eyes tracking her every movement. Clara stood between his parted knees. The heat rolling off his body was intense. She didn't hesitate. She pressed the damp cloth to his cheekbone. Arthur hissed slightly, his jaw clenching, but he didn't pull away. For a man who manages logistics, you seem to take a lot of physical damage, Clara murmured, focusing entirely on the task to avoid looking directly into his dark, heavy gaze. The logistics sometimes require a hands-on approach. Arthur's voice was a low rumble in his chest, vibrating through the small space between them. His hands, which had been resting loosely on the arms of the chair, moved. He didn't grab her. He placed his large scarred palms lightly on her hips. Clara froze. The washcloth stalled against his skin. Her breath hitched. The touch was a brand anchoring her to the floor. "Why did you stay, Clara?" he asked softly. "I told you. I didn't want to go back." "That's why you left him," Arthur corrected. "I'm asking why you stayed for me." Clara finally looked down. His eyes were searching hers completely unguarded. There was no Mafia boss in the chair right now. There was just a man who was deeply, fundamentally exhausted, looking at her like she was the first real thing he had touched in years. "Because you didn't let me answer the phone," Clara whispered. "Because you saw exactly how weak I was being. And instead of taking advantage of it, you made me carbonara." Arthur's hands tightened slightly on her hips. "I am a selfish man, Clara. Do not mistake me for a savior. I didn't stop you from answering the phone for your sake. I stopped you because the moment you walked into my study, dripping wet and completely unafraid to challenge me, I decided I wasn't going to let you leave." The confession hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. It was possessive. It was a red flag the size of a billboard. And Clara didn't care. For 2 years, she had begged to be seen. She had twisted herself into knots to be convenient, to be agreeable, to be an afterthought. Now she was standing in front of a man who commanded an underworld, and he was looking at her like she was the center of gravity. She dropped the washcloth onto the table. She cupped his jaw with both hands, her thumbs tracing the rough stubble. Arthur let out a ragged exhale. His hands slid from her hips to the small of her back, pulling her flush against him. He didn't kiss her gently. There was no hesitation. When his mouth crashed against hers, it was desperate. It tasted of whiskey, copper, and absolute certainty. Clara gasped against his lips, her fingers tangling in his dark, messy hair. The kiss was a collision. It was all the pent-up tension of the last 24 hours shattering at once. Arthur stood up, breaking the kiss just long enough to lift her entirely off the ground. Clara wrapped her legs around his waist, clinging to his broad shoulders as he walked them backward until her back hit the cold glass of the floor-to-ceiling window. The city sprawled out beneath them, millions of lights completely oblivious to the shift in the atmosphere. "You're sure?" Arthur growled against her neck, his breath hot against her skin. It was a final warning, a final out. "Make me forget," Clara breathed, pulling his face back down to hers. He did. The rain returned in the early hours of the morning, tapping a steady, rhythmic beat against the thick glass of the penthouse. Clara lay tangled in the slate-gray sheets. The bed was enormous, but she was pressed entirely against Arthur's side. He was asleep, one heavy arm draped protectively over her waist, his face buried in the crook of her neck. In sleep, the hard angles of his face were softened. The calculating ruthless edge was gone. He just looked like a man. Clara stared at the ceiling. Her body ached in a pleasant grounding way. Her mind, usually a chaotic hum of worries, checklists, and self-doubt, was eerily quiet. She had crossed a line. There was no going back. She gently slid out from under his arm. Arthur grumbled softly, shifting his weight, but didn't wake. Clara pulled on one of his discarded white dress shirts. It swallowed her frame, falling to her mid-thigh, smelling intensely of cedar and him. She walked out to the living room. The city was shrouded in morning fog. She found her cracked phone on the kitchen counter, right where she had dumped it yesterday. The screen was dark. She tapped it. 47 missed calls, 112 unread messages, all from Todd. Clara scrolled through the notifications. The frantic progression was predictably weak. 11 p.m. Clara, where are you? Stop this. 1 a.m. I'm calling the police. Who was that guy? 3 a.m. Please come home. I'm sorry. I messed up. 6 a.m. Clara, please. I love you. 2 days ago, that last text would have broken her. It would have sent her running back, ready to take his guilt and mend the relationship. She would have convinced herself that the apology was real, that this time it would be different. Now, she felt absolutely nothing. Reading his texts felt like reading a manual for a piece of machinery she no longer owned. Arthur had been right. Todd was a ghost and the séance was officially over. Reading the obituary. Clara jumped, spinning around. Arthur stood in the doorway of the bedroom. He was wearing nothing but a pair of dark sweatpants hanging low on his hips. His torso was a map of scars, some old and faded white, others jagged and recent. It was a stark, brutal visual of the violence he orchestrated. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her with a quiet intensity. Just closing the book, Clara said. She didn't delete the messages. She didn't block the number. She simply held the volume and power buttons, started a factory reset, and watched the screen go black as the Apple logo appeared, wiping away 2 years of her life in 10 seconds. She tossed the phone into the stainless steel trash can. It hit the bottom with a hollow, satisfying thud. Arthur's mouth twitched. It was the closest thing she had seen to a real smile from him. He walked across the cold marble floor, closing the distance between them. I bought you a new one, he said. He reached over the counter, opening a drawer, and pulled out a pristine matte black box. He slid it across the marble to her. Clara looked at the box. It wasn't just a phone. It was a leash. It was a tether to his world. Does this one come with a tracker? She asked, raising an eyebrow. 2, actually, Arthur replied smoothly, leaning his elbows on the counter. 1 for the hardware, 1 for the SIM. My head of security insisted. Clara crossed her arms, the oversized sleeves of his shirt hanging loosely. And if I don't want to be tracked? Arthur reached out, catching the collar of the shirt and gently pulling her toward him across the counter. Then you throw it in the trash with the old one, and you walk out the door. But if you take it, Clara, you are in. You are under my protection. You are part of my logistics, and I do not lose things that belong to me. His gaze was heavy, pinning her in place. There was no romance in the statement. It was a factual declaration of ownership and defense. I'm not a shipping container, Arthur, Clara said, refusing to look away. I'm not something you manage. No, Arthur agreed, his thumb brushing over her collarbone. You are the only thing in my life I can't control, which is exactly why I need to know where you are. He leaned in, kissing her softly. It was a stark contrast to the rough desperation of the night before. It was slow, deliberate, and entirely anchoring. Take the phone, Clara. Clara looked at the sleek black box. She thought of her empty apartment. She thought of the cold pasta. She thought of the hollow, aching loneliness of being entirely safe and completely ignored. She picked up the box. If your security team tracks me to a thrift store, they have to carry my bags, Clara said deadpan. Arthur let out a loud, genuine laugh. It was a rich, deep sound that completely transformed his face, making him look 5 years younger. Deal. 3 weeks later, the rain had finally given way to a crisp, biting autumn wind. Clara stood by the massive windows of the penthouse, sipping coffee from a ceramic mug. She was wearing a tailored black turtleneck and high-waisted trousers. Her hair was pulled back sharply. The faded leather jacket was gone, replaced by a cashmere coat currently draped over the armchair. She looked entirely different. She felt entirely different. The transition hadn't been seamless. Arthur's world was a jagged, high-stakes ecosystem. There were nights he didn't come home. Nights the encrypted burner phone he gave her rang with short instructions to stay inside and not open the door for anyone but Bennett. She learned the rules quickly. She learned not to ask about the stains on his cuffs. She learned how to read the subtle shifts in his posture that meant a negotiation had gone south. But amidst the chaos, she found an anchor. Arthur didn't treat her like a fragile piece of porcelain. He didn't hide his darkness from her. He brought her into his study, let her read the financials he legally cleaned, and listened to her sharp, practical insights. He valued her mind as much as he craved her presence. For the first time in her life, Clara wasn't standing behind a man. She was standing beside him. The private elevator pinged. The steel doors slid open. Arthur stepped out. He was wearing a dark custom three-piece suit. He looked immaculate, sharp, and intensely dangerous. He carried a leather briefcase in one hand. He stopped when he saw her by the window. The cold, calculating mask he wore for the world instantly fractured. His shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. "You're back early," Clara noted, setting her mug down on the glass table. "The Port Authority was surprisingly cooperative today," Arthur said, dropping his briefcase by the door. He walked toward her, loosening his tie as he moved. Or perhaps they just saw the news about the sudden retirement of the union boss. "I read about that." "Tragic golfing accident," Clara said dryly. Arthur stopped in front of her. He reached out, his warm hands resting on her waist. "Tragic." He leaned down and kissed her. It was a grounding ritual they had developed. The moment he crossed the threshold, the violence of his day was left at the door. Here in the glass cage, they were just Arthur and Clara. "I have to go to the Cliffside estate tonight," Arthur murmured against her temple. "A meeting with the northern families. It will be tedious and likely hostile." He pulled back, looking down at her. "I want you to come with me." Clara paused. She had never been to a formal meeting. She had stayed on the edge, the ghost in the penthouse. Bringing her to a sit-down with rival groups wasn't just an invitation. It was a declaration. "You want to introduce me to the wolves?" she asked, tilting her head. "I want the wolves to know exactly who they are dealing with," Arthur corrected, his eyes darkening. "I want them to see the one thing in this world they are forbidden to touch. And I want them to see that she doesn't flinch." Clara looked at the man who had answered a wrong number and violently dismantled her normal existence. He was a monster to the city, a tyrant to his rivals. But to her, he was the only man who had ever truly paid attention. She didn't feel fear. She felt a cold, sharp thrill rising in her chest. "Let me grab my coat," Clara said, a sharp, confident smile playing on her lips. "I wouldn't want to keep the wolves waiting." Arthur smiled back, a dangerous, hunting curve of his mouth. He offered his arm. Clara took it. She had sent a breakup text into the void, hoping to sever a frayed thread of a broken life. Instead, she had accidentally woven herself into a tapestry of absolute power. She walked toward the elevator with the king of the underworld, entirely unbothered by the darkness. She had finally found a man who knew exactly how to make her forget. If you loved this story of accidental fate and dangerous romance, make sure to subscribe so you never miss out on our weekly deep dive audio dramas and dark romance stories.